find the inability to seek and to serve others to the point of the way Timothy and Paul did, we too will find that same sin in us. Yes, ma'am.
From the chapters or the verses before this and then what we're studying today, it looks like to me he's saying, y'all need someone, I can't come, I'm going to send my A game. We're not just going to sit down, we're going to pray, no offense, we're going to pray everything's okay, because some people believe, as long as I pray and I believe, God's going to find a way. But he's also saying, you have to make a plan. I've made a plan. If nothing happens, I'm sending my A game in.
Yeah.
And we're going to go from there, but we have to understand we've got to have plan B.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
we're going to go with plan A.
Yeah, good. And Timothy and Paul has always been an active component. Paul has never been on the background to have faith and believe and everything will be fine. He's never played that game. He's always been the one that's going to be engaged. He's always been engaged, and he here sees Timothy as that type of person that's going to be engaged. We're actively working towards this, rather than we are coming together to pray about it and hope everything works out right. It's an intensity, it's a value, and it's an investment. And it's hard for us to wrap our heads around, but if that's the way it's supposed to be, then everything else is sin. Everything else falls short. Everything else is wrong. Not necessarily. It happens to be the way we're built, the way our lives are built, the way our demands are built. Otherwise, we, brothers and sisters, would be hard-pressed to find the time to serve Christ, to serve the Lord here locally, as we should, when we start judging and grading like that. Right? So the opportunity here to find that the rest of the congregation was weak and inadequate is one that I would like to slow down if it's there. I would like I would like to have Paul's statement in Timothy seen as praise in Timothy rather than complaints or bitterness in the congregation, the people around him. That's what I'm hoping to get across. As Alan stated, verse 22, but you know of his proven worth, that he served with me in the furtherance of the gospel like a child serving his father. Proven worth, that proven lends, it takes itself into the fact that he's been proven, he's been approved, he's been tested and tried, and he's been found triumphant. That proven word carries the fact that Timothy's been through the fire. Timothy's been through the fire, he's been tested, he's been tried, he's been approved. He's moved on. That's Timothy's given there. He's been proven, his proven worth, that he served with me in the furtherance of the gospel like a child serving his father. The serving here will take the one of, it's the slave attitude mentality. It's the slave mentality. Now, we have, I feel, done well in the congregation within the brotherhood to understand slave in biblical terms is not the slave that we understand. So we're not seeing this serving, a child serving his father as in he's got no choice, but that he enjoys carrying on the will of the one above him, his father. He enjoys it. He values to see someone else accomplished. How great it is when you've got a business or a partnership of any sort. So you can call it a marriage, when one values the success of the other one. You don't see it much anymore. When someone values the success of someone else to the point where they'll put themselves at their mercy to make sure that they succeed. We don't see that much anymore. That's the attitude here. And that was the attitude of the slavery then in a lot of ways, biblically speaking, in a lot of ways. Now, you do have the ones that were caught in war and they were going to do what they were told or else, but that's not the biblical use of it that we have here. Questions or comments?
Do you think because Timothy and Paul were not married and not have other obligations, that they could devote themselves to the Lord more fully, completely, because they were not distracted by it?
And that's a truth that we've got. Absolutely, I do believe it. I believe it, and I'm committed to it. And the human energy to where we like blacks and whites. We like things that are clean and pure and simple, to where if that's the way it should be, then this has got to be wrong. But that's not the way the Lord designed anything. And we know that through the gospel accounts. The fact that the men that he selected to follow him had no way, any connection of being the perfect mount. But God made them the perfect mount, the perfect vessel. So Paul and Timothy had the ability to serve in a capacity that the people around him could not serve. But the people around them weren't serving wrongly necessarily. And it's good to recognize, and within the brotherhood, we would do well to recognize that the church would do better if we had more of this one or that one or that one or this one, or if they were more like me. But that is not the way the Lord designed anything. And for us to take and put that pressure on the church is foolish. Yep, I do agree completely. And Paul states that in later terms, to where he's not married, so he doesn't have that conflict. And it would be good if men were like me, because they wouldn't have the pressures of the marriage. But at the same time, he applauds the marriage relationship. So, absolutely, I do. Thank you. Okay, good. So Timothy, you got praised the gospel like a child serving his father in verse 22. Verse 33, for I hope to send him immediately, is what my translation reads, as soon as I see how things go with me. Does anybody else have a different translation on 23? Serve him, send him to you immediately.
I said just as soon.
Soon?
Just as soon as I can.
Just as,
I got it.
yeah. So Paul's effort to communicate with the church in Philippi is clear here. It should be. The second half of that verse, as soon as I see how things go with me. Do we see here a stench of self-involved? Is Paul, I'll send Timothy to you when I know how I'm doing back here. It's always struck me as a little bit odd to put in there. I mean, we've got a man that has served the brethren relentlessly to the point of no physical ailment is too much. But yet here he says, I'll send him to you as soon as I see how things go with me. Henry?
But he was somewhat sure of what would happen to him because of the next verse. He said, I'm sure that the Lord will help me come to you.
He does that again. He does that in the Lord thing again. He did what we saw in verse 19. He brings it in there again. And he starts with that. Again, he uses that. That's his initial statement. So there's a supportive language. There's language that will support the statement that you make, and then there's language that carries the statement. You've got the thing that's going to be the driver, or you've got the thing that's going to be the supporting agent. And in the Lord, in verse 19 and in verse 24, you see that's the controlling statement. That's the thing that's going to pull this through. It's not the thing that's going to support it to be carried through. There's a different mentality here. Paul, I suggest, in these verses, has got a little bit of concern about his future. And I suggest that in the latter part of verse 23, when I see how things go with me, Paul was uncertain on how things were going to go with him. He wasn't sure what the outcome was going to be. Now, in the past, we hadn't seen this kind of energy from Paul. In the past, Paul was boisterous. If I die, I die. But here, the language is a little different. And it could be that he was writing to a congregation that he connected with intimately, that he valued like his home base. You remember we suggested it, like everyone has this place to where they can go in, and it doesn't matter how crude or how judgmental, you can go in and just be you. You can let everything go and be you. You can say the wrong thing and it's okay. You can act wrong. Your hair can be wrong. Your dress and your feet can be anything. You can be you. Paul, the congregation here, that was his place. This was his place, we suggest. And it could be that the concern with his well-being, where he was going to end up, how this outcome was going to turn out, was more intimate, more emotional, because he didn't really know, and because of the value or the connection he had with the recipients, the ones that received the letter.
I think also that the church of Philippi was worried about Paul. So he was telling them, as soon as I see what happened to me, I will send him to you. And then I hope I can come soon after. So he was encouraging them by saying that Timothy's going to stay here with me to encourage me until I can do this.
Well done. Well said. Yes, sir. Verse 24, like Henry pointed out, I trust in the Lord that I may myself also will be coming shortly. I trust in the Lord. If it's going to happen, it's only going to happen because it's in the Lord. Verse 25, but I thought it necessary to send you Epaphroditus, my brother, my fellow worker, my fellow soldier, who is also your messenger and minister to me. So I thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus. Send to you Epaphroditus would lend to me to understand that Epaphroditus was not intended to go back. That Epaphroditus' service was intended to go serve Paul and be with Paul. That they had sent him, he had a monetary value. He'd come with money. He'd come with a way to help Paul fund his work there, but at the same time, Epaphroditus was also an offering. Epaphroditus was a servant to Paul while Paul was there. Not someone, just a messenger or courier. He wasn't just to drop off the check, see how things were going, and then head back home and go have supper with mom and dad again. He was going to serve Paul. He had been pulled from the congregation, and he'd been sent. But Paul here says, I found it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus. Now, I enjoy the way he broke that down, and we can study it. And again, I've said several times, when we study, we can read too much into it and just make a mountain out of a molehill, whether positive or negatively, or we cannot read enough into it. However it goes, we're going to break it down and study it as it said. My brother, so we see here that Epaphroditus is definitely a member of the church and connected with Paul in that way. Fellow worker, we would expect that Epaphroditus is also diligent in serving the Lord as far as spreading the word, the gospel, sharing the word. Now, he's also a fellow soldier. What will we give that? What do we see if he's a brother? He's a man in Christ. He belongs to the church. He is diligent in serving the Lord as far as evangelizing is what we're going to put it as. What's the soldier implying? He's a fellow soldier. Say?
That he fights for the Lord.
Fights for the Lord? Okay. All right.
It's not meaning that he's a soldier out here fighting for independence, well, I guess he is.
Yeah.
For the Christians, but we ourselves should be considered soldiers. We're out here every day trying to fight and spread the gospel.
So what's the difference between a fellow worker and a fellow soldier? I mean, in theory, in that aspect, none of us are soldiers today. Or are we soldiers, depending on how you look at it? How did you define that, fellow soldier versus fellow worker?
I can't define that.
Okay.
To me, it's
Fair enough.
It's the same.
Okay.
Jesus tells us to be servants.
Yep. Good.
Well, how you going to be a servant? Well, we serve each other as a congregation, which is the right thing to do. But then when you step out of the congregation, you become a soldier. But now you're actually going out into the world and trying to spread the gospel.
And going out into the world, you're going to be suffering hardships of some sort. In theory, right?
In theory.
Now we have heard.
Nothing like it was back then.
Right.
I'm not going to get it.
But then,
But you still, as today, how many times have you talked to somebody that's out of it? That's nonsense.
taking and losing friendships, relationships, business relationships, however you want to, because you've decided to share the truth. You've decided to be a fellow worker And it turns into you being a fellow soldier because you had to endure the hardship of losing that relationship, whether personal, professional, but you carry on, right? So we can take it that way, that Epaphroditus has been to the side to where he has suffered for the sake of Christ. Not only is he working to fulfill the gospel, the good news, but he's also suffered because of it. His way we'll suggest that. We'll put that into that place. Epaphroditus has suffered for the work of Christ also. He's made it through.
One way to put it was, I looked at it when I first read it, a soldier is a protector, while a worker does what Epaphroditus is doing.
Okay. All right, well done.
And he made, when I first looked at it, I said, a soldier is protecting the Lord.
I like it. Thank you. And there's going to be value in that. Yeah. The last half of 25, who is also your messenger and minister to my need. 26, because he was longing for you all and was distressed because you heard he was sick. We're going to go 26 through the end of the verse, and then we'll come back and study that as a block of text. Because he was longing for you all and was distressed because you heard he was sick. For indeed he was sick to the point of death, but God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, so that I would not have sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore I have sent him all the more eagerly, so that when you see him again you may rejoice, and I may be less concerned about you. Receive him then in the Lord with all joy, and hold men like him in high regard, because he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was deficient in your service to me. Yeah, all right, good. So the point of death. So Epaphroditus here, we see that we've got Epaphroditus is sick. He got sick. He made it through. He's better now, and he's going back home. So Paul sent him back home. So we understand that Epaphroditus' primary goal was to come and serve Paul in prison. That Epaphroditus, once the trek was made, Epaphroditus at some point had gotten ill at least to the point of when he made it to Paul. Because if he had gotten this sick on the way, he primarily wouldn't have made it to Paul. So he got sick to this point when he was with Paul. And him being sent back home wasn't what was planned. But two things is going on here. Epaphroditus longing to be sent back home. He wanted to be sent back home. Did you see that? Because he was longing for you all. He was longing for you all. Was he homesick? We can speculate, can't we? And was distressed because he heard that you all heard that he was sick. So Epaphroditus' relationship with the church there could have put Epaphroditus in a role of leadership, possibly, to where his congregation, his brethren, were worried. But at any rate, however it came about, Epaphroditus wanted to get back home, longed to get back home, and he was in distress. So that distressed is the same term that we see Jesus use in Mark and in Matthew in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he took them up and he said, "Stay here, for I am very distressed." It's the same term. And as we carry through, we're going to nail down, and then hopefully you all can brush up on it. We can brush up on it next week. But Paul suggests, for some reason, receive him then in the Lord with all joy, and hold men like him in high regard. I found it interesting that Paul needed to tell them to receive him in any certain way. Receive him then in the Lord with all joy, and hold men like him in high regard. Because he's defending Epaphroditus, it seems, in a way. Again, speculation. I have nothing but speculation. And I'll leave that speculation to you. how you paint that picture. Next week, chapter 3, we'll pick up in verse 1 of chapter 3, and we'll go from there. Questions or comments before we depart? Coffee and donuts downstairs from my understanding. Thank you.